to fix these problems. Governance, maybe it's not as bad as it looks. It's time that our politicians got that.
Thank you. Now, to deliver the keynote address, we'd like to invite the Governor of State Bank, Mr. Shahid Hafiz Dada.
I was a bit confused when Arif asked me to be the keynote speaker on a budget seminar. Really, frankly, this is nothing to do with State Bank. In a sense, if you look at our mandate, that really doesn't stretch. I think it is important to have the context in mind. I think the first and foremost is that everything relating to economic policy is not going to be in the budget. So when we keep referring to economic policy, the spendings, then what has happened has been the rising commodity prices internationally and how that has influenced government behavior, government policy. That brings me to the obvious point about what is happening to oil prices. Then I know it's impact both on the economic growth rate as well as government spending. And then something that Arif also referred to, recent political events for the business environment and certainly for international flows in terms of investor sentiment in terms of the investment climate. What has all this really meant, apart from slowing down of the economic growth and inflationary expectations, which play a key role in our review of our enterprises in this country. And it was fascinating for us. We share the results as we compiled them. We were looking at both the impact in terms of pricing decisions. For me, it was fascinating that the vast majority are actually see it leveling off 14 or 14.5 by the end of the year. The budget deficit, in which I want to link with what is happening to the pressures in the banking system. Electricity is 120 billion relate to last year, which explains part of the increase in the deficit that are. We also forget that the flood-related expenditures were 40 billion. We also forget that we were unable to pass on, although well over 550 now, if you add on some money which has to come through this year. But there are, of course, positive features as well. I mean, there's been a remarkable change on the external front. Same time last year. The bulk, we all know, is because of improved prices of cotton. The turmoil in the Middle East, will it start making a difference? Who knows? Who knows? Several honorables and I think it is time to exercise some caution. From the relative stability in the financial markets, we've been doing all kinds of stress testing. One thing that Arif said that I think I need to highlight is an initial point. Let me highlight something. I was just looking at some numbers this morning. Guatemala, with a population of 7 million, has doubled the number of taxpayers compared to Pakistan. Just to set the scene for you. The structural issues that the terms of trade have moved in favor of those sectors of the economy. It has been a very painful experience at a personal level. I'll tell you why I say that. Because you use an instrument when you hope that there will be behavioral change. You want to use an instrument that people will change their behavior. Interestingly enough, because the State Bank has not been reducing I'd like to share something. First, I think much more important. Interest rates are also linked with inflation. You can't have So yarn being a commodity was being hoarded on the basis of borrowed money, which is at a low rate of interest, a separate matter. Okay. The second area is that you also need to protect the balance payments and the exchange rate. So you need to have the interest rate just making sure the financing side on the balance of payments as well as protecting the exchange rate. Because I think people would be interested in some of the numbers. The growth to loans from the private sector, and forget the rate wasn't important in 2009. Loans to the private sector actually grew by just 2.1%. In 2010, 3.1%. Increase in nominal terms. Inflation was much higher. So in rupee terms, they were only growing by 2.1% and 3.1%, and this year by 3.5%. Loans for investment purposes actually were negative by 4 billion. So people were forced to retire. The rest of it was by 2.1%. Government borrowings from the banking system went up by 60%. Next year, when maintaining that discipline. So in the last 4 or 5 months, there has been a major shift in terms of prudent financial management. I think not to recognize that would be very unfair. 2.9 trillion has to be rolled over every year. 2.9 trillion has to be rolled over. One other data that I just quickly do it when Arif was speaking. You find it interesting. Total credit to that we provide as the state bank, that because that, by the way, is also printing money, the EFS part. So if I knock off the EFS part, again, in the last 2 months, you see the impact of which is the curtailment of expenditures, a review of the subsidies, especially the untargeted ones, the quasi-fiscal operations in terms of public sector enterprises, and finally, of course, the tax to GDP ratio. Because to me, if we...
Very old hands, they don't look old still, but old hands nonetheless. Okay. And we should do this, and we should shoot down the drones, and we should stop the NATO logistical chain, and throw the Americans out. And yet we do not understand that there is about a threat. And nobody wants to talk about how we can raise these resources in our country. Source, which is barely 20% of the GDP. Agriculture, which is about 24%. Services, which probably is in excess of 50%, which was called the VAT and then the RGST, and now I think we're back to GST. The various petroleum levies that we have, which are huge. There's no distinction. That is the fundamental problem with an indirect tax. It does not distinguish between the rich and the poor, as opposed to their own interests. They are not our relatives. They have their own interests, and they do money available. It's expensive. There is no gas available. There is no electricity available. Those of us who invested massively in self-generation on gas, there's no gas either. And through some, a lot of money has flowed into the rural centers of Pakistan. Good for, primarily, it's an advantage for the land-owning class. Bear in mind, it's over a 4 trillion rupee economy, the rural economy of Pakistan, and I think last year add to it another 300-400 billion, and in the last few months. The Pakistani inflation is converting from, I think for the first time, from a cost-push inflation, and there is a higher figure into double digits. So these, we meet the IMF conditions. In the last 4 years, the only way we have been able to meet zero, it is increasing rapidly. It is increasing rapidly. That is not how you fix economies. So they have no purchasing power to begin with. So the inflation doesn't matter to them. Let's create some jobs in this economy. Very dear friends are going to say that. Thank you very much.
When my friend Nizami asked me to participate in the seminar, I told him that never run out, make a few time, things, deficit, financing, cost overruns, budget deficits and all that, Rahul was. And he said, we brought it reform to India. Let me help you. And we saw the transformation of Indian economy starting from 1992. History has seen, Narasimha Rao did China, and after death of the Chairman Mao, China was in a disarray. And a gentleman who spent some years in jail, Mr. Deng, Europe, I asked to be now under pressure. Because democracy today is started to being seen as creating debt. Look at Greece, look at Ireland, look at all the Greece in our factories and textiles. We have, and my experiences in various businesses, and I'll give you an illustration of what can be done, On issues of principles, we were together on one side, Dr. Nadimul Haq and myself for 20 humongous problems in our country. The word circular debt. They say that our public sector deficit is 350 billion. I don't agree with that. I think it's nearer to 1,000 billion when you also look at the opportunity cost. What does it require to payable bills? In Balochistan, you recover only 20% of your billing. In Sindh, parts of Sindh, 40%. You can't fix it. You have to take a radical surgery you have to do. And we should, Muhammad Mia Subro, Zubair Subro, and myself with Dr. Yaqub, when we said we are going to separate these people who are unprofessional.